This is episode 45 of a series where we examine the cut content, design, and development of Fallout New Vegas. In today's episode, we're taking a look at Camp Searchlight, the test map, character creation, and more. Let's get into it. Bonnie Springs is an area north of Goodsprings. Initially, the player finds it controlled by a group of raiders called the Vipers. 4 days after defeating the Vipers, Cazadors move into the area. However, both the Vipers and Cazadors originally spawned at Mountain Shadows Campground. Not only that, but there were meant to be 9 additional Vipers and 8 additional Cazadors, which would have made both encounters significantly more difficult. Area designer Jorge Salgado revealed why these changes were made in a script note. This game mode script runs with a low-frequency update so to save processing cycles. It's responsible for some encounters in the Mountain Shadows Campground, including a Cazador takeover. Move this encounter to Bonnie Springs and reduce the number of spawns so that we can run shenanigans on adorable consoles. Aww. It's unknown what was going on in this area prior to the Vipers and Cazadors being moved. Perhaps it was a ghost town, or maybe Obsidian had other plans for it. Due to this encounter being moved, Shadows Mountain Campground has no significance outside of a star bottle cap.
What?
There's an unused world space called Test Map 01. It's filled with various effects, buildings, items, NPCs, etc., and is really cool as this kind of test level is something that gets deleted from most games. In fact, many of New Vegas's test cells are empty voids that had their test content deleted, so this provides a unique look at how Obsidian created the wasteland. And of course, there's some cut content too. Bethesda's infamous suite roll was seemingly considered, as it can be found here and was adjusted for hardcore mode. There's some cut buildings here called Apartment Pre-02 and 03. Notably, they have no doors and would have been some of the largest explorable buildings in the game. Populated with NPCs and props and placed in the wasteland or a settlement, they would have caused serious performance issues, which is also probably why they aren't used. It seems like they would have fit in perfectly in areas like Westside or North Vegas. Several low-poly, inaccessible versions of this building are used, but it's not the same. Perhaps the most interesting cut content here is graffiti that reads, "Avenge Pahrump." Pahrump is a real city in Nevada that lies northeast of Goodsprings. Perhaps it was a NCR base or settlement that was destroyed by the Legion, similar to Camp Searchlight. The world map was originally larger, so it's possible this was cut along with the area once the Mojave was reduced in size. It's also possible this location was only meant to be referenced, but if so, it's strange it went unused. Nopa Cave is one of FNV's many secondary dungeons and is inhabited by fire geckos. Several days after the player defeats the fire geckos, up to 8 more were intended to respawn, but the activator is missing and as a result, it can never happen in the base game. While many secondary dungeons do have respawning enemies, there's really no reason to return to Nopa Cave after your first visit, so this oversight wasn't a huge loss. Chomps Lewis has AI packages to wander around Sloan, eat in the cafeteria, and sleep. They were meant to be used after the player spoke to him for the first time. In the final game, he stays in his dialogue package and stands in one place forever. There's an unused class of NPCs called Outer Vegas Defender. These NPCs would have been both male and female and had randomized low-level equipment. Their name suggests they would have appeared in the areas surrounding New Vegas, perhaps fighting off fiend attacks or other threats. There's another set of unused NPCs called New Vegas Resident. They're a part of the Outer Vegas, North Vegas, and Strip Dialogue factions. While both the Defenders and Residents were just generic NPCs, they would have made the wasteland feel more alive.
Some legionaries snuck into the camp and set off some kind of radiation bomb. I don't know where they got it, but it was damn effective. Killed almost everyone and turned the rest into ghouls.
Overrun by feral ghouls, rad scorpions, and even a rad scorpion queen, Camp Searchlight is one of the more challenging locations in FNV. However, it was originally much more difficult. A notable number of feral ghouls and turrets were disabled at Camp Searchlight and the surrounding area. It's difficult to say if these cuts were made to balance the area and make it easier, or if this was done out of performance concerns. There are also some disabled dead bighorners at the edge of the settlement. Behind the fire station, there's a strange, somewhat hidden NPC named Training Dummy. It bleeds and can be dismembered when attacked because it's just a discolored NPC. It can only be found on the player's first trip to Camp Searchlight, and it disappears afterwards. It seems like this was an unfinished idea that managed to slip into the final game, and somehow avoided being patched out. There are references to more than 20 songs that aren't actually in the game files. It's likely that all of these were cut due to licensing cost. The song Hangover Heart by Hank Thompson appears in the credits and was intended to play on Black Mountain Radio, but also doesn't exist in the game files. It's too bad these were cut, as having more music variety would have gone a long way, especially when you consider the length and replayability of FNV.
Easy. You've been out cold a couple of days now. Why don't you just relax a second? Get your bearings.
In an interview, Obsidian CEO Fergus Urquhart detailed how character creation might have differed. Originally, we had this idea where the player would be able to choose between 3 races: human, ghoul, and super mutant. It was just the engine. It really had to do with how all the weapons and armor worked. Trying to have them all work with ghouls and super mutants was going to be... Bethesda felt like it was going to be a nightmare. It wasn't like they said no, but it was a very strongly worded, "We would really suggest that you not try to do that." If Obsidian had the time and resources to run wild with this idea, the player's chosen race likely would have had a drastic effect on your interactions and dialogue with various factions. Perhaps if you played as a ghoul, Jason Bright and his followers would accept you with open arms, but the Brotherhood of Steel might not be so friendly. Cutting this was the right decision in the end though, as there are already plenty of broken dialogue lines and frankly unfinished armor meshes. Adding more of both would have only caused more issues. Unfortunately, this is the second Fallout game this concept didn't make it into, as the idea of super mutants and ghouls being playable races originates from Black Isle's cancelled Fallout 3. There's a cut tutorial sequence where the player needed to jump on a chair before moving this Brahmin skull. From a developer note, it apparently had a corresponding line of dialogue, but it unfortunately no longer exists. The sequence was disabled for the E3 press demo, eventually cut, and then reworked to moving any item rather than the skull. Interestingly, a message still appears after interacting with the skull, despite the player never being prompted to move it. Combined with the cut medical trait form the player filled out, these additions would have made character creation a bit more interesting. Regardless, FNV has one of my all-time favorite character creation sequences. There's an unused cell called Craftsman Home Interior 01. It's similar to Doc Mitchell's house, but has a slightly altered layout and different props. It's also less well lit and much dirtier. Maybe this was an early version of Doc Mitchell's house, but it's likely unrelated and just happened to use his house as a template. Maybe it was a raider hideout? A crack house? Your guess is as good as mine. That's all for this episode. Until next time, friends.